Okay, I think this is a good time to begin. So hello, everybody, and welcome to our second pre-conference workshop for New Directions East Asia 2021. Today's workshop is entitled Separate or Integrate, Assessing Speaking is a Discrete and Integrated Skill, and will be run by Richard Spivey and Carolyn Westbrook. Richard has worked at the British Council in London with the Assessment Research Group since 2016. His main responsibilities include overseeing operational analysis and developing the receptive skill components of new tests. He also works on a variety of assessment development and training projects worldwide. Richard has previously worked in the UK and Turkey, mainly in the university sector in test production, management, and research. His areas of interest include language assessment literacy, test taker strategies, test analysis, and inclusivity in language assessment. Carolyn is a test development researcher at the British Council. She has been involved in language testing and assessment for 15 years and has been involved in a number of testing and assessment projects. Her main research interests are in EAP and ESP testing. Formerly an associate professor in EFL, she is a senior fellow of the UK Higher Education Academy and has also worked as a teacher trainer, and materials writer for over 25 years. Carolyn is the author of a number of books for Cambridge University Press and a number of additional materials for Cambridge University Press, including promotional presentations and online teacher training materials. Before we begin, can I ask all of you to please make sure your microphone and camera are turned off, especially from the beginning of the workshop. If you have any questions during the workshop, please feel free to type them into the chat box. Our presenters will do their best to try and answer them on the spot. This workshop is interactive, so please be prepared to participate in it. And finally, if you have any computer problems or connectivity issues, just say something into the chat box. Me and my colleague will try our best to help you. Okay, I will now hand over to our presenters. Richard and Carolyn, feel free to turn on your cameras, on your audio, and also start sharing your screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that excellent introduction. I think I need to upgrade my biodata. Yours is very impressive there, Carolyn.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Okay, so in today's session, welcome everybody, wherever you are. Good morning, good evening. We're joining you from the UK today, so it's morning for us. I realize it's probably a bit later for most of the people on the call. You're very welcome to our session today. Separate or integrate, assessing speaking as a discrete or integrated skill. So we're going to look at speaking as a whole today. And first of all, we're going to look at it as more as a discrete skill on its own. And then in the second half, Carolyn's going to look more at how we integrate speaking with other skills. So this is the overall structure of the session. You can see we've got a lot in there. So we're going to start with speaking, the constructs and the challenges of assessing speaking, some of the pros and cons of testing it as a discrete skill. We'll have a couple of activities there as well. And then we'll look at speaking in the CEFR, first of all with the 2001 version, and then later on when we look at the reception, production, interaction, and mediation scales in the companion volume of the CV from 2020. So we look at the interaction scales, using those with integrated tasks, look at the mediation scales and using those with integrated tasks as well. And then our final practical activity will be designing an integrated skills assessment. So we hope that you're ready for that. And we'll look at some of the, to wrap up, we'll look at some of the pros and cons of integrated skills assessments and some of the considerations in integrated skills assessments as well, if you want to make some of your own assessments going forward. So just to, for us to start off with, let's have a look at, we'll have a little poll. On your telephone, could you please go to menti.com? You may have used this before. It's an online polling facility. And we're going to look at a few questions here. Let me just fetch them up for you. So once you get to menti.com, could you put in this code, which is 39161469. And you can see, hopefully you can see the first question there. Which is, how often do you do speaking activities in class? Okay, we're getting a few answers here. Okay, looks like people seem to be doing quite a lot of speaking in class. This is looking pretty healthy. Most lessons, a lot of people in every lesson. Okay, impressive. Okay, good. Let's move on. Oh, regularly. Okay. Okay, any more answers here? Okay, honoring special speaking lessons. Okay, so I think we can see that most of you do quite a lot of speaking activities. Now I just need to move this on. Okay. So next question is, do your students enjoy speaking? Okay, interesting. Mainly yeses, a few no's. Okay, so we got about 70% there. So yes, so most of the students do seem to enjoy it, which is good, we hope. A bit worried about the 27% who don't, but that's personal preference for your students, I guess. Okay, good. I think we've got a good idea of that as well. I'll just bring up our last question, which is, do you assess speaking where you work or in your institution, or the last time that you were teaching, if you're not a teacher at the moment? Was speaking a part of your assessment program? Okay, well, we seem to have quite a consensus there. So everybody assesses speaking. So I guess we can all acknowledge that it's an important skill that we need to think about. Okay, thank you everybody for giving us your opinions on that. And I'll just take that out. Okay. So thank you for your sharing your opinions on those. Again, just following up from this, it would be good for us to just share a few ideas of the kinds of things that we do. So now I'd like us to, we'll go into breakout rooms, small breakout rooms of maybe 4 people in each breakout room. Carolyn, will you be able to arrange that for us?
I'll set those up for you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So talk to your colleagues in your breakout room, introduce yourself, and think about how similar your experiences of speaking are. It seems that everybody is testing speaking. So find out how we're doing this. First of all, what kind of speaking activities do you do in the classroom? Do you use them as warm-ups? Do you have special discussions maybe, or debates? Do you do them as pre-reading, pre-listening activities, or after reading and listening activities? That's quite common. How do you, so that's in class, so how do you assess speaking? Do you do it individually, like an interview? Do you have students working in pairs or in groups? So that's the assessment stage. And do you think there's any way that you could improve the way that you assess speaking where you work, or in the place where you last worked and you last gave speaking tests? So think about those questions in your group. I think we'll just have 5 minutes, so we'll keep it quite short. So what kind of activities do you do? What kind of assessments do you have? And is there anything that you would like to change or improve about the way you assess speaking? Okay, so let's go into the, please join the breakout rooms now. Okay, if you could just join your breakout rooms.
We've got quite a few people who haven't joined the room, so there's a few with just 2 or 3 in.
Okay.
But I guess so long as there's at least 2, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, that should be fine, I think. Please join a breakout room if you haven't done already.
I'm trying to upload the document, Richard. I don't know if you saw it, but it
Yeah.
won't just let me upload it from my hard drive. It keeps asking me to. Jonathan says attempting and failing, and has asked Neil. It keeps asking me to link the different drives to Zoom so that Zoom can access all my drives, and I'm like, I don't think so. He used to be able to just upload the document straight in there, which is a bit of a nuisance.
Okay, that may be a setting with the meeting settings.
It may well be.
Yeah.
There's about a minute left, and I put it on a 15-second finishing up, so they'll be coming back pretty swiftly once they run out of time.
Okay, thanks. Could you just tell me when time is up when they come back in, because I can't see that at the moment. Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, they're closing now, so they're coming back now.
Okay, excellent. Okay, welcome back, everyone.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you, Karen. Would anybody like to share any of their things that they talked about in their breakout room? We just have one or two people who maybe say what kind of speaking assessments that they do. Any volunteers? Don't be shy.
Okay, I can do it.
Okay, thanks, Martina.
Well done, Martina.
We didn't have much time to speak, and we had to rely to our memories because we are both more in language testing now, not in language teaching. But Duan remembered her special speaking classes for language major students, and she combined two kinds of activities and assessment approaches. First, learning-oriented approach, where they focus on a special activity or skill, etc., and they assess speaking, or in with the individual approach, or in pairs, or in group discussions, and it always depended on the kind of activities and the focus of the activity, the assessment. What she mentioned, what was interesting for me, that she admitted that for this kind of assessment, she didn't have much time to give feedback in terms of how to improve the skills. That it was just a kind of description of the problem, strong and weak points. I hope I'm right, Duan. Just correct me if I'm not. And then they also had at the end of our unit or the classroom a more formal assessment when they assess them. Okay.
Okay, good.
Correct me.
Was that a good representation? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Martina. Yes, so these are kind of common issues that we come up against. The feedback to students, that's an interesting one. But I'm sure that we've all had issues with speaking, because it can be quite a difficult skill to assess, especially if you have a large class and you have a lot of students and trying to fit in the time, and the practicalities often can be quite difficult as well. Okay, so thinking about this, well, Caroline and I both work on this language assessment in the classroom, which is a MOOC, a free MOOC course that runs about twice a year. You can find it. Some of you may have done the course. If you haven't, please consider it. So this is kind of the fundamental principles of assessment for teachers to apply in the classroom, and we usually have several thousand people on each course from around the world. We've had from 170 countries, I think. And what we do at the beginning of the course often is that we ask participants what skills they're really interested in when they come to the course. And as you can see, productive skills are very prominent there, especially speaking. You can see speaking is by far the most popular for people to learn about. But we did realize with this that actually we didn't have integrated skills in there. So one time recently, when we gave a workshop to a bunch of teachers, we added integrated skills to our questionnaire, and you can guess what happened. So again, speaking was quite popular, but by far the most popular was integrated skills. So these are, let's say, two hot topics, certainly among teachers. So this is one of the reasons why we're doing this workshop today, but it shows that our concerns are probably shared by quite a lot of people in quite a lot of contexts around the world. So let's have a quick look at what the what speaking is in terms of the construct. So the construct being the thing that we're trying to assess. What is the actual skill we're trying to assess? So what is special about speaking, and you know, what makes it different from writing and other skills? What are the things that we need to bear in mind when we're testing speaking, especially? So obviously there's the sound of speech. These are taken from Luoma 2004. These are the main things that she thinks we need to bear in mind. So there's the sound of speech, pronunciation, and that needs to be judged against a standard, which these days we usually think about as being comprehensibility, being able to understand, rather than based on any native speaker norms, which is now a bit of an old-fashioned way of looking at it. We use spoken grammar, so we don't use the same kind of grammar that we would in writing, obviously less formal. It's based more around idea units than more coherent clauses and sentences. And this is because there are different types of speech. Obviously, there's planned speech and unplanned speech. So in planned speech, we're thinking about, you know, lectures, speeches, things which do actually more approximate kind of written language, more formal in tone. And then there's unplanned speech. And, you know, this is going to involve incomplete sentences. It's going to change the way that people talk about things, topicalization. So, you know, like, that man, I know him. These kinds of sentences which you wouldn't find in writing. And this is all done in real time. So obviously we use different vocabulary, a lot more phrases. We rely on high frequency words generally. The number of words we use in colloquial speech are actually very small. We use fillers, the ums and ahs, and all of those things. We're a lot more tolerant of errors that we wouldn't be in written language. So these are, in spoken language, these are extremely common. And if you transcribe spoken language, you find a lot of errors and mistakes in there, but that doesn't usually stop communication. co-construction of speech. So we've got this idea of compensating, because speech happens in real time, we're compensating for a lack of planning by co-constructing the meaning with somebody else. So we're constantly clarifying, explaining to make sure that the other person understands, asking for clarification if we need to. Obviously, this we have this idea of the kind of speech, individual or interaction, where each participant is a speaker and a listener. So you take on two roles within a conversation. In terms of meaning, it can be quite vague. So a person doesn't show their opinion very clearly. This is where the role of pragmatics comes in, or they could take a very open, clear stance and opinion. We also have to remember that a lot of the purpose of speaking is social. So this is kind of chit chat, it's to maintain social connections with people. This is on the social end of the continuum. And then you've got the informational end, which is where communicating a message clearly and comprehensively is the most important thing in usually more formal situations. So of course, the situational context itself, that can cover our environment, where we are. It can cover the participants, so who we're talking to, and also the genre, the type of speech. So for example, obviously the way we speak to a friend when you're sitting in a cafe with them is going to be very different from the way you speak to a potential employer in a formal interview. So these are some of the things that we have to think about when we're coming up with tasks. Also, another way of looking at speaking and speaking activities is by looking at speaking functions. And we can use function lists to show the range of language that our students might use during a speaking task. And these can be very useful for us. They're useful for test developers. So if we identify the kind of functions that we want to get out of a task, the type of speech we want students to use, then we can match this to the task and make sure that the task is appropriate for eliciting these functions. And this helps us obviously to identify the construct and find out what we are actually testing. It helps raters because they can then see what kind of functions are coming up and what kind of functions are expected in a task and mark the performances accordingly. And it's also important afterwards for users and for researchers, because we need to validate our tasks. We need to find out whether they're actually eliciting the kind of functions and the kind of language use that we intended. So these are the kinds of functions that we might use. These are the ones that Professor Barry O'Sullivan has been working on for the last 10 years. These are some of the functions that we use, for example, in the British Council aptitude test, but these functions could be used for any type of test, obviously. So they're basically separated into three different categories. You have informational functions, which tells us about what kind of speech a student is providing. Interactional functions, so this is when obviously more than one person is involved and how they speak to each other in this role as speaker and listener. And then we've got managing interactions, which is what role do we have for this kind of intentionally shaping the way that a conversation or a discussion might go. So these are fairly self-explanatory. I won't talk about all of these. These are different ways that we can speak. So providing personal information, obviously, especially at lower levels, is very important function. We can explain our opinions, etc. You can think about what kind of level these functions might be more appropriate at. So, for example, providing personal information, you might think of as perhaps an A1 or A2 kind of function, whereas if you're talking about summarizing later on, or staging, which is kind of saying, you know, first, second, third, looking at processes. Then, you know, these might be higher level functions that might come in at around, you know, B1 or B2. So these are kind of basic speaking functions that we can use. When there's more than one person involved, then interaction. So obviously these functions need another participant. You're speaking to someone, you're agreeing, disagreeing with someone, you're trying to persuade another person. You're negotiating meaning. So when things are not clear, you ask questions to find out what a person's ideas really are, and to try and compensate for any misunderstandings. And then there's a more metacognitive set of processes, maybe, where you're actually trying to organize a discussion. So things like starting, initiating, changing the topic of a discussion, reciprocating, so making sure that, you know, people are speaking to each other and have a chance to speak to each other, making decisions as well. So these are all different aspects of speaking that we can use to analyze our tasks and to help us devise our tasks. If we think about the CFR in terms of speaking, it's separated. We're looking at the 2001, the original CFR, the Blue Book, and this was separated into spoken production and interaction. In terms of spoken production, it's quite straightforward. We have these sustained monologues, either describing things or putting a case, trying to persuade someone, for example, in a debate. And then we've got public announcements and addressing audiences. So these things are when someone is just speaking without reference to an audience. They're removed from the audience in some way. So for example, public announcements, you may not necessarily be able to see who you're speaking to. And these, you know, may involve a number of different activities, as you can see there: reading aloud, speaking from notes, playing a rehearsed role, singing even. And these may involve some kind of reference to a text, which is quite interesting. So although there's no idea of mediation here, there is some reference to a text. If we look at interaction, there are a few more scales here. Again, these are fairly self-explanatory, and these are looking at the kind of scenarios where you would be interacting with another speaking participant. So they're based on different contexts and speaking for different purposes. We also have interaction strategies in the CFR as well, which are separate from these, but these are the main speaking ones which are included. So they're very different from informal conversation to, you know, formal interviews, interviewing somebody and being interviewed. And interesting there that we have in the 2001 CFR reference to a native speaker, which is not included in later editions of the CFR in the CV. Okay, so quite a bit of information there about functions and the CFR. I'd like you now to put this into action, so we can go into breakout rooms again. And we have very simple speaking activity for you to think about. And you should be getting a handout, I hope.
The handout is, well, there's a link to the handout in the chat, Richard.
Okay.
So some people have seen it. If you just scroll back up through the chat, you'll find the link to the platform event page, and you can download the handout there. Okay.
So have a look at the handout, because the functions and the CFR scales just referred to are in there. So think about that, and think about what scales might be relevant for this task, and what functions might the task elicit. So your task is give a short talk about your favorite hobby 2 minutes to prepare, 2 minutes to speak. Say what you do and why you enjoy it, and what's a good way for a person to start this hobby. So thinking about that, try and analyze that task in terms of what CFR scales are relevant and what functions students might use in answering the task. Okay, so if we could go into breakout rooms now for 5 minutes should be enough.
Yep, all ready to go then. Okay, the rooms are open now.
Okay, thank you. So please join your breakout rooms if you haven't already.
I've moved a couple of people around, so we've got at least 3 people in each room now, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And again, I put 15 seconds on, so they'll be coming back pretty swiftly.
Who's got the clicky clock?
That would probably be me. I don't hear it because I've got earphones in.
I imagine it to be like a massive grand clock with a big cuckoo bird or something ready to pop out.
No, it's just a clock above the window. So it's just basically not quite above my head, but more or less.
Don't try and sleep while that's on. Tick, tock, tick. Interesting session so far, guys. I'm enjoying it, I have to admit.
Thank you. I haven't done anything, but I don't know why I'm saying thank you. I'm just playing around in the background here.
You allowed me and Neil to realize it's hard to get bloody files into the Zoom chat here. God. But yeah, luckily we found a way to deal with that.
Yeah, good job.
To know for the next couple of days. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, I was like trying to register, like link into all the different things it was offering me, and then it said, oh, if you do this, then Zoom can access and edit and create all your files. I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's clearly something to do with the fact we're using Cvent's Zoom account basically. So
yeah,
luckily Super Neil found the solution.
Well done, that man.
He deserves his coffee that he's enjoying now.
Excellent.
Nice one.
I've lost my kind of controls, my Zoom controls. Disappeared.
The people will be coming back in 30 seconds, just to say. If you click on the little Zoom camera at the bottom, hopefully you'll find them. Or if it's the ones at the top, the bit that says you're viewing Richard Spivey's screen, I've got a similar problem. I've
lost them completely, so even
I think, Richard, I just made you co-host. You weren't co-host previously, actually. So maybe you've got it now.
Okay, they're all coming back. Maybe you want to unshare your screen and reshare. Would that make it easier? Would you find them if you do that? They're going to be back in 5 seconds.
Okay, I'll just carry on.
Okay, they should all be back now.
Okay, excellent. Welcome back, everyone. So I know you didn't have much time, but I hope you had a chance to at least think about this activity and the kind of scales and the kind of functions that you might get from this. So would anybody like to put some of their ideas in the chat? So what kind of functions do you think were elicited by this task?
We've got describing in the chat.
Good. Yep, I can see that now. We've got describing,
expressing preferences.
Yep. Strategies. Okay.
I think all of the informational functions might be relevant for this task, except probably for summarizing, staging. I do not know, but maybe all of them.
Yes, we're certainly, providing information, justifying. Yeah, so we're basically looking at mainly looking at the informational side of things. Obviously, there doesn't seem to be any interaction in this task, so there are no interactional functions and no real managing interaction functions either. So we're looking at that left-hand column mainly, and you could choose from a variety of those, as we've seen from everybody. Thank you. And what about the scales, the CEFR scales that you think might be relevant? Could we put any of those in the chat? Which scales from the CEFR do you think might be relevant for this type of task? Okay, spoken production, yep. Great, describing experience, that would seem to be very important.
And we were discussing if addressing audiences might be relevant if the audience is defined somehow, but we didn't know.
Okay, yes. No, that's a good point. The task doesn't define whether you're going to be speaking to the rest of the class or to a teacher or to yourself, but it's definitely part of sustained monologue. Okay, thank you everybody for your ideas on that. I'm conscious that we need to move on, so I'll just wrap up my section of this. You notice that although mediation is mentioned in the CFR 2001, there were no actual scales in there. So this only came in this the CV, which Carolyn is going to talk about in a moment. So these are some of the factors that we need to take into consideration with speaking. What about our test taker, so age, gender, personality, who the interlocutor is, so who is going to be asking questions, who are they talking to, especially if it's a teacher or examiner. How can we manipulate tasks? For example, timing is very important, and whether you give people preparation time or not is a very important part of the task. The rating scale, obviously, we're not really going to go into that in detail today, and the rating performance. So how are people actually marking the performances. So these are just things to bear in mind. So these are our discrete skills tests, where usually, 4 skills are tested independently of each other. These can be good because they can give us some data, quantifiable data that we can use and provide the basis for, reliability studies and things like that. 4 skills tested separately can be good for diagnostic placement purposes, so we can give people, a score for speaking, which is only about speaking. When we do receptive skills tests, well, they can be quick, easy to rate if we test them discretely, and there's less risk of one skill affecting another. And we can give profile scores. So we can, again, going back to that diagnostic idea, we can do the skills separately of speaking, writing, listening, and reading. But obviously, testing the skills separately does have its disadvantages. It's actually, in real life, it's difficult to test one skill only. We often focus on grammar and vocabulary and just the language when we try to do that. It's possible in some tasks, especially reading and listening, to try and guess answers when we give discrete items. Students may lack ideas in productive tasks, so inability to speak. This is why some students don't enjoy speaking so much. And in real life, we often use multiple skills together. So it doesn't reflect real life and often doesn't reflect classroom practice either. So I'm going to stop there. I've already taken up a lot of time. So I'm going to hand over to Carolyn, who is going to talk more about the integrator skills.
Thanks, Richard. There we go. Just get that. Can you see my screen? Yep, yes. Cool. Okay, so obviously Richard has spoken a lot about discrete skills and about the pros and cons of discrete skills. I'm just going to move that along there. But if we think about discrete skills, as Richard just said there, they often don't reflect what happens in reality, and our test tasks should always do that. Also, a lot of discrete skills tests are seen as focusing on the formal aspects of the language. So they focus on the linguistic system rather than, again, this relationship to reality. And back in 2007, Shaw and Weir argued that real-life performance is increasingly seen as the criterion of choice against which test tasks are judged. So again, there's this emphasis on making our test tasks reflect real life. And therefore, there's a growing interest in integrating skills for assessment because of their authenticity. So we saw that discrete skills assessment looks at each skill individually, but actually quite often with speaking, we're often talking to somebody. So in the example that Richard gave you, obviously it was one person speaking on their own, excuse me, but quite often we talk to somebody else. I'm just going to mute my microphone for a second because I'm just about to cough. Sorry about that, folks. I've been coughing on and off all week, but at least it's not COVID. That's a good thing. So if we think about reception and production as discrete skills, we can see here that with listening, the input goes from the input medium to the person. With reading, it's the same. We have the input medium and it goes to the person and it stops there. On the other hand, with production, the input, or the output rather, starts from the person and comes out in the form of speaking or in the form of writing. So that's reception and production, but actually we need to think about different modes of communication. And in the CEFR, we talk about 4 modes of communication. These are reception, production, interaction, and mediation. So what we can see is that reception is a discrete skill and production can be a discrete skill. But if we want to have interaction, we have to integrate the receptive and the productive skills. So we have integrated skills. Similarly, with mediation, we mix reception, we take the information and we do something with the information and we produce something to make integrated skills. So when it comes to integrated skills assessment, we can be doing any mixture of those things. We might be doing listening and speaking, we might be doing reading and speaking, we might do listening and writing, or we might do reading and writing, or we might do speaking into writing, or vice versa, or we might have a mixture. We might have listening and reading into speaking, listening and reading into writing. Any combination of those is possible. So in terms of interaction, as we actually saw with the little icon for speaking, we have this two-way situation where the information goes from one person to the other person and then back again. And similarly with written interaction, it's the same thing. Somebody writes something to somebody and that person responds in writing. So this is written interaction. Mediation, on the other hand, if we think about mediation of spoken input, the input comes from outside into our learner, our person, our interlocutor, if you like, and this person changes the input or amends the input so that another person can understand it. So the input comes in, this person then has to pass that information on to another person who, for whatever reason, isn't able to access the original input. And it could be passed on in the spoken form, or it could be passed on in the written form. Similarly, if we think about written mediation, or rather mediation from written input, we read the text, the input comes into the person doing the mediation, and then they pass that information on to another person, either in the form of spoken language or in the form of written language. So you can see with mediation, the information isn't going directly between the one speaker and the other speaker, but it's going from outside of one speaker into that speaker and then being passed on either in spoken or written form. Okay, so a quick question, or a quick couple of questions. I'd like you to just pop your answers in the chat, please. I think we've possibly covered some of this a little bit with what you talked about with Richard at the beginning, but maybe not completely. So first of all, do you integrate skills in your teaching? So do you have a situation where people will do, for example, a role play where there's some sort of interaction, or where they have to mediate between inputs? So a few people saying yes. Yeah. Any more? Yeah. Yes, very often indeed. Yes. And that's a really good answer, because we do in fact often integrate skills, mostly reading to write, listen to the story and retell. Yes, or mediation there. Yeah. So we can see that quite often in the teaching, yeah, as Martina quite rightly said, it's not possible to separate when learning and teaching, probably, or is it? Well, quite often it isn't, because quite often there's some sort of listening and some sort of speaking, or there might be some sort of reading and speaking, as we've said, or there might be speaking and then it might be followed up with a writing task. What about in your skills? What about integrating skills in your tests or assessments? Do you integrate the skills in your tests and assessments? Yeah. Good. Yes. Yes. Excellent. Okay, so the task should be really easy for you. So if you're all doing integrated skills, why are you here? That does beg the question. Okay, so if you're all experts in testing and assessing integrated skills, what are some of the pros of integrated assessment? What are some advantages of integrated assessment? Comprehensive language ability, good, okay. Saving time, making it more natural, yeah, so this idea of authenticity, absolutely. Get an overall sense of the ability, yeah, more holistic approach to learning, yeah, excellent. Okay, so there are a good few pros. What about the cons? Are there any negatives of trying to do integrated assessment? Skills interference, indeed, yeah. Complicates the interpretation and feedback. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so it can be quite challenging. Okay, let's move on then. Let's have a look at some of the pros that I've got here. So quite often, if you've got an integrated test, you can provide ideas and language, that should be in brackets, for the output through the input. Obviously, as we've said, it's more authentic and it reflects the target language use domain more realistically, let's say. We have both interactional and situational authenticity, and it allows for more motivational project task types such as projects or reports, or even movie making if we want to. And actually, I find them much easier to design than a discrete test of speaking in this case. But the cons, of course, are that the input may give away too much in the way of language. And as we said, or hinted at, the skills interference, so the output task achievement depends on comprehension of the input. And as you quite rightly said as well, it's difficult to distinguish the test taker's language from the source materials, so from the input. Therefore, we have to think about productive skills versus reproductive skills. So what is the difference there? We can't diagnose, or we can't provide diagnostic feedback on the individual skills because there's this mixture of the skills. And the skills may require something other than language, i.e. mediation, which goes beyond purely language. And Duyan has put in the comments a construct validity concern. So that's obviously something that we do need to think about as well. But to address that, this last point is that the rating scales need to therefore take account of more than just language. And that's a key point. So it's actually perfect timing that Duyan put that in the chat just as I was about to press the button for this. So we need to be very careful that we know what our construct is, that we define our construct correctly, as Martina has just said. And once we have defined the construct, we therefore need to take account of that in our rating scale. Okay, so just a very quick task for you. If you just put your answers in the chat, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, discrete versus integrated skills tasks. Is a dialogue with a friend about when and where to meet discrete or integrated? So just put a D for discrete and an I for integrated. Okay, so we've got some I's, we've got D. Okay, all right. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mixture going on here. So I'm not going to give you the answer to this one, because you need to think about this actually for the next task. But it's interesting that we're getting some discrete and some integrated. So now the question is, which skills do we need to complete each task? So for question 1, which skills would we need? Would it be speaking, listening, reading, writing, or a mixture? So we've got S and L. Listening and speaking. Listening and speaking, speaking and listening. Yeah, indeed. So the first one, we obviously need listening and speaking. What about number 2? Taking a telephone message and telling your colleague the information in the message. Okay, we've got listening, speaking and writing, listening, writing, speaking. Yep. So yes, we definitely need listening, we definitely need speaking, but we may also write the message down as well. And if we've written the message down, we may need to read it to tell our friends about it as well, but mainly listening and speaking, but possibly writing. What about number 3, a talk about your favorite hobby? So this is the one that you just did with Richard. Speaking, yeah, so we can see, we know already that that's just a discrete skill. What about a presentation about ancient Polynesia? So we've got speaking and writing. Speaking, reading, writing, reading and speaking or writing. Yeah, so we can see that this is far more complex because we need to read some information probably about ancient Polynesia. We need to do some research. We might even listen to a documentary about ancient Polynesia. Then we need to speak as we're doing the presentation, and we probably need to write some information on some slides as well. So that's far more complex than just a talk about your favorite hobby. And oops, the last one, a parent giving instructions to their child. What's going on there? Speaking, listening, possibly, speaking and or writing, speaking, listening, speaking, reading and writing, okay. Okay, so probably if I'm just telling my child where to go, I've probably got I've got speaking, obviously. I might need to listen if they've got some questions, and I might need to react to that. If the information is very complex, then obviously I might need to write it down for them, but mainly speaking, but possibly listening as well. So now, bearing in mind that we've got these tasks here, some of which are discrete and some of which are not discrete, we said for number 1, I think most people said that this was interaction. What about number 2? Is that interaction, mediation, or is it a discrete skill? So again, just pop your answers in the chat. If you want to write D for discrete, I for interaction, and M for mediation. So we've got a few mediations. We've got a discrete skill coming up, mediation. Yeah, exactly. So it's mediation because I'm hearing the information. I might write it down to remind me, but then I'm passing the information on to my colleague because they don't have access to the original information. A talk about your favorite hobby, we already said was discrete. What about a presentation about ancient Polynesia? Number 4. Mediation, yeah, exactly, mediation. And a parent giving instructions to their child. The last one. So the last one is mainly discrete, but as we said, it may involve interaction as well. Okay, so hopefully when we think about the tasks, we need to, or you can see that we need to think about what skills are being involved. And once we know which skills are involved and we know whether it's interaction or mediation or just a discrete language task, then we can refer to the CEFR, and there's recently published is the companion volume, and that expands on the interaction scales and the mediation scales much more. So we'll look at that briefly now. You have these scales in the handout that's available from the link in the chat. So we can see that for interaction, we have interaction activities and strategies. And those are broken down into oral interaction, written interaction, and online interaction, and then 3 sets of interaction strategies. So I won't spend very much time on these because I say you've got these in your handouts, but we can see that there are 10 different scales for oral interaction, 3 for written, and 2 scales for online interaction. And these are the scales for oral interaction. So we've got overall interaction, we've got things like understanding an interlocutor, conversation, formal and informal discussion, goal-oriented cooperation, obtaining goods and services, and information exchange, interviewing and being interviewed, and nowadays, of course, using telecommunications is very important. Then we've got written interaction and online interaction. But again, I'm not going to spend any time on those because we're focusing on spoken interaction. Now, if we think about the curriculum volume from the CV, as we said, once we know the task and we know what skills the task is eliciting, we need to think about how we can assess the task either formally or informally. So either as formative feedback, if you like, or as a summative task. So our assessment content here would be a role play to discuss what film to watch on Saturday. The content aim is to take part in an informal discussion with a partner. This involves the functions of expressing opinions, agreeing, disagreeing, comparing and contrasting, and so on, and obviously relates to vocabulary for types of films. And our real world domain that this is designed to reflect is making plans or informal discussions. And this then is the example of the task. So you and your friend are going to the cinema on Saturday, look at the film descriptions, which are these 3 here, and between you decide which you want to watch. So what we can do when we have that task is we can then go to the companion volume and say, right, which of those different scales can help me? And here we can find the informal discussion scale. So this would be for an informal discussion with friends. And if we look at A2.2 and A2.1 descriptors, if we're teaching an A2 class, then these give us some descriptors of the kinds of things that we would expect our students to be able to do when they do this task. So we can use these descriptors then to form our, or to build part of our rating scale. Similarly, we have all the mediation descriptors, and again, we have quite a lot. I don't expect you to be able to read them very clearly on this slide, but you've got this table on your handout. And again, the mediation activities are on the one side and strategies are on the other, with various scales involved for the different things. In terms of mediating a text, if we focus on that, that will be either a written text or a spoken text, and we may ask our students to relay specific information either in speech or writing. We might ask them to explain data, for example, from a graph. We might ask them to process a text, so they might read a text and then talk about it or process it in speech or writing. We may ask them to translate, but mediation is not just about translating. We may ask them to take notes. We may ask them to respond to a creative text such as literature, or we may even ask them to analyze or criticize some literature. But what is really important is that we recognize, as I say, that mediation is not just about translation. It can include two forms of the same language. So it can be written language and spoken language. It can be a formal register going into an informal register or vice versa, or it can be a dialect register going into a more standard register. It can be within the same language. It's not all about translation, which is often a misunderstanding. So that's important. So again, if we think about a mediation task, in this case, our test content is to explain a concept, synthesizing information from other sources. Our overall aim is to summarize information from written texts. The ability to synthesize information is the cognitive skill. This involves comparing and contrasting and signposting. So we need the language also for similarities and differences. And our real world domain is obviously summarizing and synthesizing. So here's an example where the task is, what is creative thinking? Understand this current understanding by synthesizing information from different sources. And the test taker has to read two texts and then summarize the topic. So again, when we look at the descriptors, this could be done at a higher level, for example, and we see here we've got B2 plus descriptors and C1 descriptors in the companion volume, and they can again help us to decide what features or what points we want to look for in the task that we're giving our students. So now I'm going to send you off into breakout rooms. I'm going to give you, Richard, could I maybe get you to set up some breakout rooms for 12 minutes, please? So you're going to have to be quite quick in the task, but I want you to design an integrated skills task, and it sounds like some of you already have integrated skills tasks up your sleeves, so that's useful. Think about what level the students are, what they need to be able to do with the language, the skills that the task will elicit, what the task involves, and crucially, which scales. Obviously, if you have access to the companion volume, that's great. So but if you don't worry about the descriptors. But just think about which scales you could use to assess or give feedback on the task. And if you could take notes in the chat function while you're talking, or take notes, well, ideally take notes in the chat function, then copy the chat to the main chat when we come back. That will enable us to share our ideas as we just go into the roundup at the end of that. So are we ready to go, Richard?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay, so off you go, 12 minutes.
You're in there.
Okay, and your task should also be on the handout as well.
Okay. So please join your breakout rooms. It's the same rooms as you had before. You're on mute, Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've just got a couple of people left that haven't joined, but
Yep.
It looks like otherwise most people have gone. That's okay. Cool.
Yep. Okay, good.
Talk about whizzing through it.
Yeah, yeah. These things just, yeah, they take longer than you think, don't they? Sorry, I overshot by.
That's all right, don't worry. How many rooms have we got?
But we've got a good group, I think, so.
Yeah, I think so. Mhm.
Responsive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. Hopefully people have managed to download the handout and then they can see the the scales, not the descriptors.
Yeah, as long as one person has the handout, I guess that's, if they can share it, then that
Yeah.
should be all right. If you want to grab a cup of tea or anything, I can watch the shop while you're away.
No, it's fine. I told Kevin originally to serve me with coffee when he made coffee, but then he was like, "You want me to come in and disturb it?" I was like, "Yeah, maybe not. No." I'll get it afterwards. Got my COVID booster after this, so I'm hoping I'm okay this afternoon because I've still got to work on the presentation for tomorrow.
Oh, right, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, watch out for that. Apparently the booster is hitting a few people quite hard, so
Oh no.
especially if you haven't had Pfizer before.
Oh no. I was hit quite hard after the first one. I don't want to be hit quite hard after the second one.
Did you have
Oh, the third one.
AstraZeneca before?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm supposed to be playing in a football match tonight as well, so I hope it doesn't affect me.
Well, they say it comes on quite quickly. I wasn't sure with mine because I've been a little bit ill the last few days anyway, just with the cold and stuff. So I'm not really
had
sure.
the booster and her arms. Her arms were really, really painful. Yeah, she was completely knocked out. She was fine the first two, but the third one, yeah, wiped her out. She couldn't move her arms for about a week or something. Very weird.
Wow. That sounds
my
scary.
dad was fine though. He's 81, and my 101-year-old grandmother was fine with the booster. So
wow.
my weak younger mother. I said to my mum, that's because my dad and gran are so old, they practically have no immune system for there to be a reaction. So don't worry about it, Mum. It's still young and healthy.
Yeah. Watch this space. If Aidan's presenting on his own in the morning, you know why.
Oh God. Is Aidan on holiday at the moment?
Yeah, I think he's traveling today, isn't he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, lucky thing. He's going to Gran Canaria.
Yeah, it's got the Canaries.
Wonderful.
Lucky man.
Yeah. I'd love to be going to the Canaries just now.
Yeah, it would be nice. It's sunny outside here, but
it's sunny outside here as well.
Not the Canaries.
Yeah, no, exactly.
By any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the fact that it's missing a 2 in front of the temperature that's the problem.
Yeah. Okay, they're halfway through now, so they've got 6 minutes left. They'll have a 30-second countdown, so.
Right, okay, cool.
All good.
Sorted. Oh, yeah.
So Jonathan, we are going to run over just by maybe up to 5 minutes.
No worries.
But hopefully that's okay.
When you finish, I'll pop my video back on and just say a few words.
Okay, great. And there are no sessions immediately after this, are there? So I think we'll
No. Even if there was, every session at this conference, it's a different link, so we don't need to worry about other people coming in or anything like that. It's Neil's the key person. He's got the power to shut the room down. So Neil's secretly listening, though. It's okay. He knows not to do that.
Cut off in my prime.
How did the earlier workshop go? Do you know, Jonathan?
Yeah, very good. You've had you beat them in number of participants by about 5 people. But yeah, good. Trevor and Wilson to enjoy themselves, and kind of weird double act. They were together in the same room, so it was a weird dynamic, but kind of a fun dynamic.
Okay.
They stand as well, so they were in the same room, same video, standing. It's quite funny at the beginning. They tried to do a background, and Will remained with this rainbow background, but only Trevor's head remained. It looked ridiculous. I'll send you a photo later. It's quite funny.
Floating head.
Well, it's Trevor's head as well, so it was like a football.
Quite scary.
Quite amusing.
Brilliant. Yeah, I always think that I look completely deformed if I've got a virtual background on, because my hair sort of ends up getting kind of lost and I look like I'm totally deformed.
See, I always thought hair helps because when I have a background, my ears disappear. And so I thought if I had hair to cover the ears, it might help, but clearly not then. Damn.
No, it sort of makes my haircut look just really weird. And you end up with chunks of head being cut out. It's very strange.
I'm not a fan of backgrounds.
So what did you send out the virtual background for?
I stressed the word optional, I'm sure.
Yeah, I actually can't use a virtual background on this computer anyway, so it's not high tech enough for that.
Yeah,
I noticed. I think Richard has tried to clean his background up by putting a plant there. I don't remember that being there.
Oh, it's been
yeah.
a little while.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. I think Richard needs to kind of bring some books forward in his cupboard, because his cupboard looks like you've just bought it from IKEA. You know, push some books to the window, it'll look better.
Very good with the IKEA there. It is indeed IKEA. I mean, I do have my bookshelf here at the back, you know, and then there are some books on there, but it's not usually in frame, that's all. And I have another bookshelf over there, so I've just got to try and position things. Or maybe I could, you know, they have that kind of book wallpaper.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be good.
Wallpaper, the wallpaper make me look clever.
My bookcase basically consists of books talking about pub quizzes and a lot of baby books, so it's not that intellectual. I can't show mine. I don't have Dickens or Shakespeare or, you know.
Well, I don't in this room. Downstairs is where we have the Dickens and the Shakespeare things.
Yeah,
the fancy books.
Only Bachman and Palmer are allowed.
Yeah. My language testing area here. The rest of it back there is language teaching.
I think I've got the 2 books that got me through my diploma: Thornbury's A to Z and Scrivener. Yeah, that's all you need. Just those 2, especially the A to Z one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thornbury's anything will get you through the dip. I think it's pretty good.
Good old Scotty.
Yeah.
It's like when you do an English lit and you realize that there's like cliff notes. You're like, oh, thank God, I found the one book I need.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to read the actual book, just read the notes. Okay, coming back soon, so hopefully we can get people to put answers in the chat.
Yeah,
See what
so
they think.
they just got their 30-second warning now, so they will start coming back shortly, and I'll tell you when the room is closed.
Cool. Thank you much.
Okay, I'll note away. Three, two, one, back in the room.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you managed to come up with some ideas. Just making sure that my...
Sorry, Caroline, I don't think everybody is back in the room yet.
All right, okay.
Zoom's given me another notification that they haven't closed yet.
All right, yeah, I see they're coming back now. Yeah.
Okay, people coming in now. Everybody's back now.
Okay, cool. Great. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a chance to come up with some ideas. If you've got any notes, can you just pop them into the chat so that we can see the kinds of ideas that people came up with? None of my group members were able to participate. Okay, that's not a good start, but thanks, Alice. Thanks for letting us know. I'm sorry for the spam in the chat.
Because it seems what we wrote in our break room appeared in the main chat, and
no, it didn't. No,
because I can see it. I can see it in the main chat, but you probably cannot. So
no, you see it in your main chat, but we don't see it in the main chat here.
Okay. That's good.
Yes, please do upload a photo if you can, Alice. I'm not sure if you'd be able to, but if you can, then that's great. Martina, though, since you're on, did you want to give us a brief rundown of what you decided in your group?
Yes, I will just put it into the main chat, and we agreed Akio would comment on it because it's her her task. So,
okay,
Akira.
Okay. Hello. Yeah.
Hi.
The activities. Anyway, I teach students at the level of A2 to B1 and university students, but they're not comfortable speaking. So I introduced a reading activity and asked them to make a pair, and then student A and B, okay, and student A, both of them first read a very short story together, and then only B can look at the text, and A cannot look at the text and start retell. And the situation is yesterday I read an interesting story, and the story is about blah blah blah, and after that student A tell also his own opinion, and his partner B listen carefully and ask some question if she has like asking about the content or asking about the opinion, and they have some kind of interaction session. And then only the partner B has a rubric. And at the end of the session, partner B write down whether he reproduced the story well, and also the opinions are well organized and interesting, so they can check the rubric. And if it's informal session, the partner B show their rubric and give feedback. You do like this, because the rubric contains linguistic part, like pronunciation, also grammatical points or something like that, and also the content part. And sometimes I do as a test. In that case, rubric should be collected to me directly, so that partner B strictly make comments, and also I think kind of severe on the rubric, I think, because the partner B doesn't have to show the rubric to the partner A. So yeah.
Okay, excellent, great. So we could also think about bringing in some of the interaction scales and thinking about how they process text and the amount of use of source text in that. But yeah, that's great. Thank you. I see we've got another one from Daphne, who says students do a presentation. So that's speaking, reading, writing, and listening. Yep, good. Thank you. So again, we can use the different scales from the companion volume for that. And a short presentation about a favorite character that would be integrated, because the students have to read a book or at least an excerpt, so they have to read, write, and speak, and then they would have to prepare a Q&A session. Yeah, exactly. So this would involve mediation and interaction. So they'd have the mediation in the preparation and then interaction in the Q&A session. So again, we can refer to the scales in the companion volume and pull out the scales that would be relevant for processing text, for example, in speech or writing. Also, some of the interaction scales, such as the ones that relate to interacting with an interlocutor. So we can look at those and we can find the descriptors that are at the level of our students, and a couple of descriptors above and a couple of levels, 1 or 2 levels above and below. And then we can see what sort of target performance we would expect from our students. Good. Okay, so just to round off, we'll just talk very briefly about some considerations in integrated testing. We'll look first at task design. So one question is, should students have access to the input while they are writing or speaking? And if so, what is the impact of that? And what cognitive processes are involved in the task? Does it change if they have input, access to the input, or does it not change? So those are the things we need to think about. We can think about the role of test taker strategies and characteristics. For example, this might enable, if we provide input for students, this might enable them to be more confident about speaking. As Akio said, it gives them something to talk about that's not necessarily personal to themselves, but something that they can speak about. We can think about the instructions, and we need to think about the role of the input text. So how important are they? How are we going to measure what they produce from the input texts? And as we said earlier on, and I think, I can't remember who said it, was it Duyen said, we need to consider the construct. And I know Duyen and Martina had a little chat there about that. So we do need to identify very carefully what is the construct, what is it that we're testing, and then make sure that our rating scale reflects that. And then finally, we need to consider the amount of input and the length of the output and how that impacts on the time allocation, especially if you think of a speaking test where people just go in and speak without any preparation. If they then have to process some input first, then obviously we need to extend the time available for the task. So those are some considerations in the task design. When it comes to scoring, we need to think about how do we account for source text use. So in the case of Akio's example, if they are reading a text, do we allow them to use language from the text? Do we ask them to turn the text over? And if they do use language from the text, to what extent are we evaluating that and in what ways as well. So these are the things we need to consider. So therefore, we need to also think about the role of the input text. Is it there for information, or is it there as a source of ideas for the output? What are the key indicators of success? What is it that we're expecting our students to be able to do? And again, we can look at the companion volume descriptors, and they will help us to pinpoint some of the indicators of success as well. We might need to also think about differences, as I said, in marking criteria compared to independent tasks or discrete tasks. So if we're just marking a discrete speaking test, we might think about content, language, grammar, fluency, pronunciation, these sort of standard things. But if we're marking a mediation task, then as I say, we need to think about bringing in different criteria which account for the use of the input text as well. And similarly, we'll have different criteria if it's a written output task. So we need to be constantly thinking about the descriptors and the scales in the companion volume to help us to get a rating scale that really reflects all the different processes that the students go through in doing this task. And does the score then reflect the ability of the student? This is very important because obviously we want to make sure that that is the case. But if, for example, let's say we have a rater rating a student who doesn't know the student and who isn't extremely familiar with the input text, then they might not necessarily notice when the input text has been copied word for word or copied verbatim. So they might give them a higher level than the higher level score than they might otherwise get if they didn't have access to that input text. So that's a really important question, that we make sure that the score in an integrated task reflects what we would expect of that student. And then finally, as I keep saying, we think about which scales we can use to help us pinpoint what we expect as a target performance. So just to conclude, the implications of integrated assessment are that they involve more interactionist second language acquisition theories such as collaborative working and scaffolding, but they do help us to provide authentic integrated assessments. As I say, we need to remember, though, that some aspects of mediation go beyond language skills. They might include interpersonal skills. So there is potential for constructive relevant variance, but we just need to be aware of that so that we can design that out or take account of it. Which means, as we keep saying, we need to reconsider our new constructs, think about what we're teaching and testing, along with the traditional criteria that we always think about, like grammar and vocabulary and so on, and therefore amend the criteria accordingly. And in our rating scale, we include criteria to take account of how students use the input in mediation, for example. We need to think about the language, but also we might want to think about the critical thinking skills and the analysis skills that the task requires and assess those as well. We might need to think about the depth of understanding that the students have shown if they're mediating some sort of input. And we also might want to think about the skills of collaboration, like managing interaction. If it's a role play, for example, with a group, we might have one person who's the chair, and so the chair might not necessarily express their opinions as much as the other members of the group, but they are there to manage the interaction. So we need to give them credit for that. So again, we can refer to the CV scales and find these scales for mediating interaction. And finally, then, as I say, we need to go beyond our traditional criteria of language and content and really identify the construct, really pull the task apart and find criteria that we can use to evaluate our students. And those are some references. We have gone over just a little bit, but thank you very much for your attention. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for taking part. And I will stop sharing now.
Yep, thank you everyone. And we hope you got something from today's session to make your choice between separate or integrated skills.
And I'd just like to say thank you, Richard and Carolyn, for that wonderful workshop. And I also strongly recommend you all to have a look at that language assessment in the classroom MOOC that Richard and Carolyn mentioned earlier. It really is an excellent course to take part in.
Yeah, what Jonathan hasn't said there, he's also one of the moderators. So yes, do come along and join us and join Jonathan as well. Because he's one of our team of people helping in the background with all the different comments.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anyway, that brings us to the end of today's session. Like with the previous workshop, please leave us some feedback on this workshop by answering the 2 short survey questions that you can find in the survey tab on the platform page. Thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you at the conference starting from tomorrow. Have a nice day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.